let us know we are nothing. When a cop shoots an unarmed black boy, he is trying to kill his own wretchedness, his own cowardly fear. But when my work is done, they will know that if they kill an unarmed black man, they will just be killing an innocent white one. They will understand the dread of going out each day and not knowing if the hate and filth of this nation will randomly take their lives too. They will fear me, and in that fear, they will all be saved. You really believe that, don't you? Asked Jamal cynically. All you're doing is adding to the pathetic violence of this history. Since the press told my story, and the Kifo graffiti appeared in the cities and on the web, the police have not shot one black boy. Did you know that? Just a coincidence, said Jamal, and he heard a low-flying plane. Is it? Or are the police realizing they are killing actual men and not apparitions of their racism? If they start killing again, and they will, then so will I. Only this time, I'll target private citizens. All these dead boys had mothers, so maybe I'll kill their mothers. How many headless white women will it take for them to understand that their savagery must end? Jamal said nothing. He just kept making mental notes of everything. So far, Kifo had not harmed him, so maybe he still had a chance. This is where you tell me I'm insane, detective, said Kifo. Where you try to appeal to the morality I received from the religion the white man forced upon us. Do you know why every dominant society converted their enemies to their religion? Yes, said Jamal. Take a man's God, you conquer his soul. Excellent, said Kifo. But your father would have taught you that, right? You already know you're crazy, and if I could figure out your method of stealth, so will others. They may find Dr. Lex, but they will never find me, or any of the information on his work. It's all stored away, and this is the only prototype. For now. You're making more of these things? Dr. Lex left not just knowledge, but a lot of money. I'm not as brilliant as he was, so the second suit is taking a long time. But patience is a virtue. If you believe your identity is safe, then let me go like you said you would, Jamal demanded. I never said I'd let you go, said Kifo. I don't want to harm another black man, but logic dictates that I should kill you. But that was not my plan. See, I had always planned to take you. Your brilliant deduction led you to me, and only made it happen sooner. So, I have another idea, Agent. A better idea. Join me. Jamal laughed, and it felt good. Yep, you're crazy, all right. The 119 is an amazing machine, said Kifo, but it comes with a price. The suit damages the wearer over time. Dr. Lex died before he could implement the fix. I carried on his work, and I stopped the damage, but it's too late for me. I will die soon, and when I go, you can take my place. One problem, said Jamal. I'm not insane. Don't worry, said Kifo. You will be.
Professor Verney is an older man who leads a group of young, ranged between 23 and 35 scientists and explorers into the rainforest to find a rare flower. He is distinguished, kind, and speaks loudly. The group differs in accents, but all retain a sort of awe and innocence for the adventure. Professor, come quickly. I do believe I've found it. An English accent with a baritone voice announced with an edge of excitement. Professor Verney Wilder was leading his group of 5 researchers through the thick foliage of the Atlantic rainforest. A drizzle damped their jackets and packs, but the mood was still hopeful as they pressed forward to find a specific flower that blooms only twice a year. According to the locals they had met a week prior, this flower was one of the most beautiful and precious specimens within their land. The professor, a man with graying hair, pushed his thick-rimmed glasses up his nose, and he warily waded through winding vines and broken branches laying on the dampened ground. The flower was said to stand 2 feet high, with rainbowed petals, and a bell as wide as a man's head. Yet somehow, this massive beauty eluded them for 2 weeks of their travels deep into the brightly blooming forest. "Hurry now! I believe our search is over." The professor pushed and passed a large brush bursting with fresh and sweet-smelling fruit in tropical orange colors to a large clearing, where the eager and desperate voice awaited his arrival. It was a small hole, just inches away from the toe of his boot, that made him pause. The rainforest had a plethora of wondrous plants to study and explore. The ecosystem keeping this vibrant new world alive was something to appreciate and respect, for it housed some terrifying beings that needed to be avoided. Poisonous plants and creatures grow within the walls of the forest. Among them were apex predators and mysterious illnesses lurking in the air and water. Already 2 former researchers had succumbed to the forest's deadly viruses and had to be sent back to the ship for treatment. It would not do to lose any more of their meager party. Darrell Richmond, a young and sturdy man with a thirst for adventure inherited by his father, whose vessel they used to make this long trip, ignored the professor's stop in stride and continued pressing forward. Verney shook his head, let the group carefully examine their surroundings. The younger ones were much more eager to see the future than to live in the present. He would have to remind Darrell about that later, when they set up camp for the night. Careful of the hole and whatever may lie inside, the professor stepped through the thick branches into a large clearing where his breath was taken away. Henry Smith, another young and eager student of Verney's, was standing a foot away from the most glorious flower he'd ever seen. The blush on the petals resembled a sunset starting at the bottom of the bell. The top of the flower bloomed outwards, yawning at the gray sky. It was painted in purples, pinks, and orange hues, with a thick stalk protruding from the ground and leaves almost as wide as dinner plates. The professor beamed brightly, calling back for the rest of the group to join them. "You did, my boy. Well done." With a faint blush, Henry straightened his brown jacket and cleared his throat. "We have one minor problem with this discovery, Professor," he stated almost nervously. Verney cocked his brow as the rest of the team assembled by his side, oohing and awing over the plant before them. "What is that, my boy?" Darrell stepped closer to the flower and carefully tipped the edge of the petal down. "I do believe it is occupied at the moment." Scene 2. Silas Moffat is a scientist who has devoted his life to studying spiders and creating antivenoms for the most dangerous ones. He is an older man who adores his daughter, Eleanor. They have an open relationship and tease one another throughout the story. Eleanor, who would be in her late teens, is following in his footsteps and learning about the world of arachnology. She's well educated with a rebellious streak. Silas stood back with a satisfied nod, placing the jar aside to wave his hand at the glorious creature now fully displayed to them. "Eleanor, meet our newest study, the mysterious yet lovely 9958. 9958 was palm-sized, with an emerald green body that measured about almost an inch and a half long, with 8 long legs that moved gracefully as she examined her new surroundings. When she attempted to scale the front glass, she revealed a dull orange oval pattern with an emerald dot in the center of her underside. "What a curious marking," Eleanor mused as she leaned closer to the tank. "It is indeed. I wonder if that pertains to her gender or is a warning of her venomous state. Perhaps it is even a form of camouflage against the thick, vibrant flowers among the forest floor," her father added as he picked up his notes from the desk. "So far, all we have are theories, nothing completely concrete." Eleanor smirked at her father. "Have you gingered it yet? Then why do you keep referring to the creature as a female?" He chuckled. "Not yet, but I have a good suspicion that it is a woman. I shall apologize to 9958 should I be proven wrong." His daughter rolled her eyes but turned back to the creature in question. What tests have you ran so far? So far, all I've done is attempted to feed it and review what notes the field researcher sent me, Silas admitted. She rejected a roach, but has bitten nearly every insect and small animal I placed in the tank with her, which you can see over the table. She's highly aggressive but appears to be a picky eater. We will keep her on a mealworm and cricket diet for now. What happened to those she infected? The insects died within the hour after the bite, Silas answered solemnly. Eleanor raised a brow. And the mouse? When was it bitten? Her father wandered over to the table and peered down at the small creature in question. Early this afternoon. We have no reaction from him yet. However, his immune system is much stronger than a roach's. We shall keep a close eye on him for the next few days to document the reaction. How odd. What did the notes about 9958 say? Eleanor queried. Take a look for yourself, my dear, Silas insisted as he handed her a piece of thick cream paper with 3 neat creases in it. Dr. Silas Muffet. First sightings were made on the northeastern end of the Atlantic rainforest, within the bell of the local flower. The thick case of webbing surrounding this species made it hard to visualize the newly discovered arachnid. Curiously, the second sighting was high within a tree. The spider had spun itself into a cocoon-like hide in the bough of the branch. It is theorized that this display of webbing keeps it protected from predators. The locals have experienced this creature, calling it something that roughly translates to Gravemaker. From this we can only gather that it's venomous and has already made many innocents victim to its toxic bite. Carefully, we have extracted the arachnid to study 3 days after our discovery of the first specimen, but we fear we may not be equipped to handle its venom. During the extraction, Darrell was bitten through the thick leather of his gloves. It was only a short time after that he passed away, sweating profusely with his veins stark against his skin and screaming deliriously into the sky. While the event is tragic, the family has agreed to allow us to perform an autopsy on his body to discover what may have happened during that horrific time. It is because of that we turn over the new specimen to your care. As always, we continue to share our findings with you as they come to us. Take care, dear friend. Professor Verne Wilder, June 27th, 1887.
Christy started awake. She winced at her stiff neck and attempted to stretch. Graham had fallen to one side, resting the full weight of his left side on her body. Trying not to wake him, she shifted her right leg, which had gone numb from her awkward sleeping position. She wondered what the time was. The moon, tinting the night sky a milky yellow-blue, had glided from the horizon to the sky above their heads. The Blazer's cab was too dark to see her watch, but to switch on the interior light she would have to shift Graham. She tried gently sliding from beneath him to avoid waking him, but he immediately opened his eyes. "What time is it?" Groaning, he struggled to an upright position. "Oh, my aching back." "Wait a minute, I can't see my watch." She switched on the interior light, squinting against the sudden glare. 11. We've only slept a few hours. She felt disappointed more time hadn't passed. Morning was still hours away. She began to drowse off again in the truck's warm cab, despite the dome light's glare. Graham's eyes seemed to be drooping closed again, too. Her head had begun to nod forward onto her chest when he suddenly stiffened and grabbed her by the forearm. He dug his fingers in painfully, and she instantly awoke. "Turn off the light," he breathed. "What? Why? What's wrong?" "Just do it. I think I heard something." She quickly switched off the light and scanned the area outside the truck. They sat listening apprehensively as the muffled night sounds from the surrounding woods gradually ebbed into an eerie, heavy silence. Then she heard something off to the right, sounding to her in her growing unease as if it were creeping stealthily through the brush. As she listened, she became aware that something was working its way closer to them while remaining concealed behind the trees. The sound of its movement seemed too big for a deer. Maybe it was several deer, or a bear. Or whatever had killed those teens by the lake, her panicked brain shouted. Her heart pounding, she reached for the keys in the ignition and the blazer roared to life. Throwing the vehicle into reverse, she floored the gas pedal and switched on the headlights, which revealed the thing as it stepped out into the road. Graham screamed, "Christy, drive! Oh, fuck! What is it?" Framed against the trees, the creature stood at least 7 feet tall, with eyes that burned redly at them from deeply furrowed sockets. The shaggy arm it threw up to shield its eyes was tipped with impossibly long, curved claws. Momentarily blinded by the high beams, it let loose a full-throated, enraged bellow. Dagger-like teeth shone in the headlight as it threw back its massive head and shrieked at the retreating blazer. Even with the full moon, she could barely see to steer because the headlights served only to light up the road in front of them and the horror now chasing them. They could crash any second, and if the wreck didn't kill them, that thing would. She had a sudden thought and shouted at her frantic passenger, "Get that big flashlight I threw on the back seat before we left. Shine it on the road behind us so I can see where I'm driving." He scrambled into the back seat for a few frantic seconds. She could hear him cursing as he clambered over boxes and clawed around on the floor. "Would you hurry it up? I can't see." "I am hurrying." His head thumped on the seat, and he grunted in pain. "Got it." He switched on the flashlight, and he narrowly missed sideswiping a large rock by the road. She jerked the blazer to the right, throwing him to the floor, but he climbed back up immediately, his eyes and hair wild, swaying back and forth with the violently rocking truck. He struggled to hold the bouncing beam steady. She risked a quick look to the front, expecting to see something unspeakable crashing through the windshield, but only deserted road met her eyes. Miraculously, they had outdistanced the creature for the moment. Her heart pounded from the tension of trying to keep the blazer from barreling over the side of the narrow road as she continued to floor the gas. "Christy, look out!" She yanked the truck to the left, but not in time to avoid the rock slide partially blocking the road. The truck skidded sideways, and she slammed into the door, forcefully as they thudded to a stop against the wall of rocks and mud with a sickening crunch of metal. Graham fell heavily to the floor again, where he groaned from behind the seat. She scooted from behind the steering wheel to the opposite side of the front seat and fell in a panic out the passenger door. From her sprawled position on the muddy road, she comprehended in an instant the catastrophic damage to the front of the truck. The tire well had been crushed inward into a sharp V-shaped indentation by the force of the impact, completely disabling the vehicle and taking their only means of escape from the thing surely barreling down on them that very moment. They had no choice but to run for it. "Graham, get out of here!" She scrambled to her feet and yanked open the blazer's back door. Grabbing Graham by the arms, she began pulling him from the truck. "We gotta go!" Crying out in pain, he lurched clumsily against her. My ribs, I think they're broken." "Damn it, Graham, move it!" "Where could we possibly run?" "We should stay in the truck. It's the only safe place." He grabbed the handle to get back into the truck, but she jerked him away roughly, wringing another cry from him. "Safe? Like those kids by the lake?" He froze. His eyes widened in realization. "Where can we go? There's nothing out here but bushes and trees." She briefly remembered the shotgun still lying somewhere in the wrecked blazer, but she knew they couldn't spare the time to search for it, let alone grab the shells from the glove box and load up. Every second counted with the speed at which the creature moved. Suddenly, she grabbed him by the hand and ran for the trees. "What are you doing?" he screamed at her ear. "Stop dragging me! Fuck, my ribs! Up, up! We have to get off the ground!" She pulled him behind her as she searched. "It's our only chance!" "Up!" he shouted. "I know you don't mean up a tree!" "We have to get off the ground!" she shouted as she ran. She could hear crashing and snarling from up the road, and knew that thing would catch up with them any second. "We'll never outrun it! We have to get out of its reach!" "How do you know it won't climb right after us?" he screamed hoarsely. "I don't," she conceded breathlessly. "What else are we going to do?" She stopped beside a vast pine tree stretching up more than 80 feet. Its trunk spanned at least 10 feet in circumference, and most important, its lowest branches hung within their reach. "Hands up!" "What? Hands up?" "Hands!" She nearly screamed in panicked frustration at his blank expression. Give me a boost already. Link your hands. Finally understanding what she wanted, he stooped and formed a sling with his hands. She shoved her foot into it, and wincing as her raw palms scraped against the rough bark, swung herself with a grunt up onto the lowest branch. Refusing to think what would happen if the tree wasn't tall enough, she twisted around to reach for Graham. Come on, up, up! Are you insane? I'm a New Yorker. I don't climb trees. I don't even take the stairs. You better get your New York ass up here while you still have one. Ignoring his cry of pain, she grabbed his arm and lifted him bodily off his feet in her urgency. Now move! Looking as if he might swoon any second, he grabbed her other forearm with his free hand as she pulled at his dead weight. Wheezing, as if in the throes of an asthma attack, he scrabbled his way up the trunk. She climbed upward blindly, while Graham struggled below her. Muttering, I'm in a fucking tree. This is insane. What the fuck am I doing? He paused for a second and then cried hoarsely, It's here! Shrieking as it tore through the underbrush, the creature crashed through the woods below them and slammed into their tree. The pine shook violently and nearly broke Christie's precarious grip on the thick branch. They screamed simultaneously as she swung from the branch with her feet dangling. The monster roared beneath them and hit the tree again. Digging her fingernails into the bark, she somehow found her footing again. Cursing at her feet slipping treacherously as she clawed her way upward, she pushed her exhausted body to climb faster. Suddenly, from below them, she heard a sound that nearly stopped her heart. The sound of claws on bark. Oh, fuck! Christy! It's climbing the tree after us! Climb faster! Go! 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 He must have been flying up the tree because his head bumped against her leg as she heaved herself up branch after branch. She wished she dared to slow down. Any second, she feared one of the smaller upper branches might crack and send her plummeting to the ground. If she fell, she hoped the impact killed her before that thing reached her. Another piercing wail from Graham slowly made her fall again. To her horror, the monster's wickedly curved claws flashed mere inches from her feet. Growling savagely, it swiped at him as he screamed and spasmodically jerked his feet away. She felt sure the creature would have them when a loud crack sounded from below. She dared a glance down again and felt a flare of intense joy. As she had hoped, the smaller branches they had climbed easily wouldn't support the creature. Under its enormous bulk, the slender branches snapped like brittle twigs. Taking one last swipe at Graham's feet, the monster snagged a loafer on its claw as it fell heavily to the ground. Seeing his shoe tumble downward seemed to do something to Graham. She could almost swear she heard the snap inside his head as his features contorted into a pale mask of rage. Glaring wildly, he leaned outward and shook his fist at their tormentor. You fucking freak! I paid $400 for those shoes! She grabbed at his shirt and yanked him back toward the tree. Forget the shoe! Just be thankful your foot isn't still in it! The rigid set of his pinched face scared her almost as much as the creature below them. Graham, you gotta keep it together. Don't lose it on me here. I need you! Pulling him by the arms, with the little strength she had left, she helped him climb up level with her. They teetered to a stop, at least 60 feet above the ground. She could see the bright sky through the gently swaying needles of the topmost branches. Wrapping her arms around the trunk, she pulled Graham to her and hugged him as tightly as she could. He stretched his arms around the trunk to hug her, and they clung shiveringly together in the tree. Below them, uttering a chilling series of enraged shrieks and bellows, the creature paced restlessly. She could see its red eyes glowing through the branches and shuddered. Gripping the trunk and Graham tighter, she closed her eyes and rested her head warily against the fragrant bark, praying the tree and her grip would hold. Evening had fallen by the time everyone gathered in Maloney's living room. Will had driven back out, and his lean frame stretched nearly to the middle of the room as he lounged on the couch. David had wanted him to hear Christy and Graham's description of the creature that had attacked them, so he could get his professional opinion. He had little to say about their monster theory, and Christy didn't push the issue. Now drowsy from the wine and food, Graham sat quietly in the corner recliner. James stood in the doorway and watched the group with tired eyes. He had taken a short nap in the afternoon and hadn't yet fully awakened. Well, let's do it. Will sat up on the couch and gave his full attention to them. I've waited all day to find out what happened to you two last night. I think we're ready to hear it." Christy hesitated, feeling strangely nervous at the semi-official air to the meeting. James walked over, and taking his daughter's hand, gave it a light squeeze. "Tell it like you did this afternoon. That's all you can do." Grateful for his support, she squeezed his hand back and plunged into the story, attempting to tell it as quickly and concisely as possible. Graham interrupted less than he had earlier in the day, but he still managed several interjections. Even with that, the telling went rapidly until the part the creature stepped out onto the road. As they stumbled over themselves and each other trying to describe the horror that chased them down that dark hollow, the atmosphere in the room became noticeably tenser. David, his eyes black and unreadable, listened to their story in its entirety without speaking. "So," he commented almost casually after she had described how they had clung together in the treetop until dawn. "So, you're saying that this thing that chased you wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a human, like some psycho with an axe." He spaced his words and spoke slowly as if forming his thoughts as he recapped their tale. "Whatever it was, it chased you and treed you, and kept you treed until right before sunup when it left, am I right?" "That's an accurate description, I guess," she reluctantly agreed, "if you want the absolute bare bones." "Will, you're the wildlife expert here. What are they describing?" David asked. "What kind of animal around here looks like that? Acts that savage?" "Nothing," Will answered flatly, leaving no room for argument. "There's nothing like that in West Virginia or in this part of the country. Aside from a brown bear, I don't think there's anything like that in North America." "We're not making this up," Graham snapped. "We saw that thing and it chased us. We spent hours in that friggin' tree with that thing trying to get at us. I think we know what we saw." James scowled at Will. "Christy wouldn't invent a story like that, and from what I know of Graham, I don't think he would either." "No one accused you of lying," Will spoke slowly, as if to a couple of children, and Christy felt her jaws beginning to clench. As she had earlier with Tess, she found Will's tone a bit too soothing for her liking. "Some unknown animal obviously attacked you last night, but, and I'm sorry to have to say it, the creature that you've described simply does not exist." "Well, apparently it does," Graham's voice rang out angrily in the room, "because I fucking tried to eat us last night." "Calm down, everybody." Tess held her hand in a gesture of appeasement. "Let's not get into an argument over this. We're trying to figure out a logical explanation for this, that's all." "Logical?" Graham repeated sarcastically. "There was nothing logical about that thing. It was monstrous, completely impossible, but there was nothing logical about it." "David," Tess appealed to her husband, "you know more about these killings than anyone else. You told me yourself once you didn't think it was human, but you didn't know of any animal capable of this. What do you think now? Could what these two saw last night have done these killings?" He didn't answer immediately, but sat staring thoughtfully into the unused fireplace. When he did speak, he seemed to weigh each word carefully. "The thing you described, if such a thing exists, could have done any of the killings. The sheer brute strength, the size, the savagery, all these things would be consistent with the physical evidence at the murder sites and with the way the victims died. It's true, we don't think a human could have done them. It's also true we don't know of any animal that could have done them. But a monster? I don't know if I'm willing to go that far." "You may not have any choice," Graham retorted grimly. "Graham," Tess argued, "tell them what you think it is. What you told us this afternoon." For the first time that evening, he seemed hesitant. He licked his lips nervously before blurting out, "I think it's a werewolf." Complete silence greeted this declaration. Then, Will spoke one word loudly and succinctly. "Bullshit!" Heading off, Graham and Christy, who both instantly looked almost angry enough to strike the big man, Tess hastily said, "No, Will, stop, right now. We're not going down that road. No insults. We keep it civil and listen to what they have to say. After all, they're the ones who went through that ordeal, not us." Will regarded her with a scowl. "You're buying into this? You, with that logical by-the-numbers mind of yours?" "Whether I believe that a werewolf attacked them isn't the point. We asked them to tell us what happened, and they did. We asked them what they thought attacked them, and they told us. Granted, we're all having a little trouble with 1 or 2 points, but being logical doesn't mean blindly closing your mind to something because it's a little bizarre. This is more than a little bizarre, and you know it, he insisted. He's suggesting that a B-movie monster is killing people by the light of the full moon right here in Augusta County. I'm pretty open-minded, but I'm having a bit of a problem with that idea. David watched his wife closely. Are you saying you think he could be right? I don't know what I'm saying, she answered slowly. Maybe he's right, or maybe he's delirious from painkillers and Chianti. I don't know. All I know is someone or something's killing people. As far as we know, they're the only 2 people who have seen this thing up close and lived to tell about it. I guess I've decided that we shouldn't automatically discount what they're saying simply because it doesn't fit in with our idea of the way the world works. What about you, Christy? David asked. Do you believe this thing was a werewolf? Yes, she answered without embellishment. I do. You can't... Will began, but Tess interrupted him. Don't tell her she can't believe that. She regarded them all speculatively. Let's take this thing 1 step at a time. 1 step at a time? Will's incredulous expression plainly said that the matter was settled as far as he was concerned. What else is there to consider? There's a lot. For instance, when have these killings taken place? Is there a pattern, or have they occurred randomly, with no discernible pattern? What you're really asking, said Christy, is have the killings all happened during a full moon? She addressed David. Well, what about it? You know when all the killings took place, don't you? Was it a full moon or not? He appeared to be uncomfortable with the question. Striding across the room, he snatched the calendar from the wall and flipped the pages back a few times, then forward, then back again. Something about the sudden stiffening of his shoulders, a rigidity in his entire body, caught Christie's attention. When he turned to face them, he looked as if someone had punched him in the stomach without warning. It has to be a coincidence. What? Tess asked. Did some of the killings take place during a full moon? You could say that. I guess we never noticed it before now. Well, Graham demanded impatiently. Did they or didn't they? They all took place during a full moon, at least all the ones we know about. The phase of the moon isn't generally covered in an incident report, so we didn't notice. Even if we had, we wouldn't have attached any significance to it. Let me see that. Will jumped up from the couch, grabbed the calendar from David's hand, and traced along the dates with a calloused forefinger. Let's see now. That kill on the path around Lake Misty. That was the last week of May, wasn't it? We found the remains on the 26th. The killings took place the night before, on the 25th, Will said. That was the first full moon of May. What about the next night? That's the night the coon hunters were killed. That wasn't a full moon, he pointed out. There's only one night when the moon's completely full. Near enough, Graham said. Near enough? Will repeated doubtfully. According to Hollywood, the moon has to be full. Or aren't you a Lon Chaney Jr. fan? Not necessarily, Christy objected. We don't know whether werewolves only come out during a full moon or not. That's only in the movies. This is real life. Will looked as flabbergasted as he sounded. Will you listen to yourselves? You're talking as if an honest-to-God werewolf is actually on the loose. Calm down, Will, Tess said. Nobody's suggesting you go out and buy a box of silver bullets. Oh, yeah? Graham retorted. Sounds like a pretty damn good idea to me. Graham, please, she entreated Christy mutely, with troubled eyes. Antagonizing each other won't get us very far. Ease up, Christy said quietly. You can't expect them to automatically believe us. Not about this. Where are we headed with this? Will asked in exasperation. We all know this is a dead end, because there's no such thing as a werewolf. Period. The phases of the moon have nothing to do with the killings. It's just one big coincidence. I'm through discussing this. I want to hear the rest. James surprised them when he spoke, having remained silent throughout the debate. I saw that tree and the ground around it. I don't think these two did all that damage. My daughter believes a monster tried to kill her last night. She's never been one to make up wild stories, even when she was little. If she believes a monster's what chased them last night, well, I guess I have to believe it too. He twisted around to face David fully. So, what about the rest of those killings? David blinked, apparently taken aback by the older man's small speech. Christy smiled warmly at her father. not completely surprised at his unqualified defense of her claims, but still more grateful than she could say. "Thanks, James." Graham held out his hand, and her father gravely shook it. "Glad someone's in our corner." David cleared his throat. "Okay, where were we? Let's see. Remains, then hunters, then we jumped to June." "June?" Christy asked. "Weren't there any more killings in May?" "Not that we know. No one's reported missing, and nothing's been found. The next killing occurred at the lake, night before last. I don't have to check the calendar for that one. I remember that fat full moon from the party at your cabin." "There was a full moon last night," Graham added. "We spent hours staring at it from that treetop. There's one tonight, or close to it." Will leaned toward the bay window and pulled up the blind, revealing the waning moon's pale face against a black sky. "Does that mean it's out there killing someone right now?" "Shut that blind!" Christy and Graham, speaking sharply as one, both started from their seats in alarm. "Take it easy, you two." Will hastily tugged the blind back down. "It's just the moon. I didn't mean to scare you." Christy could feel the shakes coming on, and a glance at Graham told her he felt the same dread that had suddenly overwhelmed her. He had turned even paler than he had been all evening, and although he had quit smoking 2 years ago, he reached with trembling hands for James' cigarettes and lighter. James took the Bic from him and lit the cigarette for him. He inhaled deeply and immediately began a coughing spasm. Shaking his head at the pitiful display, James took the cigarette from him and stubbed it out. "I have an idea," Tess said suddenly. "We need to know what's going on, whether we think it's a werewolf or some rabid animal or even some kind of psycho. I think we should investigate this ourselves. We can use the resources we have at our disposal right here in this county and find out as much as we can about this thing." She spared a glance for David. "Any objections of an official nature?" "That depends on what you mean. I can't have you interfering with the police investigation." "No, nothing I have in mind would involve us in anything official. That's up to you and Will. If we get in your way, we'll back off." A tingle of excitement started deep in Christie's midsection at the idea. Was she suggesting they hunt down the monster themselves? She still found she liked the idea of turning the tables on the predator. Angry at being chased and treated like some helpless creature, she wanted a little of her own back. "I'm in. What about the rest of you?" No one spoke for several seconds. They all appeared to be thinking carefully about Tess's proposition. "Well, gentlemen," Tess prompted, "are you game?" With a quick glance at his daughter, James shrugged and nodded his head in agreement. Will hesitated a moment, then said, "I think I'll have to sleep on it before I agree to anything." Christy knew he wanted nothing more than to put several hundred miles between this valley and himself as quickly as possible. She didn't blame him. His first, and probably last visit had consisted of a series of nightmarish occurrences from the beginning. His friendship with her didn't obligate him to endanger himself, maybe even risk his life for people he barely knew. When he finally spoke, his answer took her by surprise. "Okay, I'll stay and help you look for this thing." He smiled humorlessly at her gasp. "I don't know what I'm doing here, except I wanted to see a friend for a while. I don't belong here. I definitely don't like it here, but I'll stay and do my bit." "Graham, you don't have to do this, really." He held up his hand to silence her. His eyes narrowed to chocolate-brown slits, and she could see something in his eyes that further surprised her. Although considering what he had endured, his reaction shouldn't have. He was furious, deeply, utterly, and completely furious. "I'll stay because that thing pissed me off," he continued, with a new edge to his voice. "It destroyed my beautiful truck. It chased me and made me hurt my ribs. It terrified me and forced me to run through the woods and scramble up a tree like a freaking chimpanzee." He grinned wickedly at her, his impish sense of humor not quite crushed by last night's events. "And it ate my loafer. My beautiful, handmade Italian loafer. I despise that thing and I want it dead." "Are you sure? I mean, really, really sure? This could get dangerous." She felt suddenly afraid for her friend, but he put a finger to her lips, shushing her gently. "Let's go monster hunting."
"I can't wait to get back to somewhere civilized," Brian said. "Someplace with beer."
What do you think could have broken this tree like this? Jessica asked. Don't know, don't care, Brian said. It was probably blown over in a storm or something. I don't think so, Jessica said, and it doesn't look like it was chopped down either. It looks almost like something came along and pushed it over. Like what? A bear? Brian asked, suddenly sounding alarmed. I don't know, maybe, Jessica said. She doubted it, though. There certainly were bears in this area, but she didn't know of any bear that would be large and strong enough to knock over a tree like this, or even why a bear would do it in the first place. Still, when she looked closer at the bark, there did appear to be fibers on it that might have been bear fur. She picked up a strand of the fur and started to examine it, but before she could look at it too closely, Brian was standing up and stumbling away from the tree as quickly as he could go. If there's bears around here, I'm definitely not sticking around, Brian said. Brian, where the hell are you going? Jessica asked. You can't just go wandering off up here, especially without even putting your boots back on. But he wasn't listening to her. With one boot left behind at the tree and the other still in his hand, he was already moving at a fast jog back the way they had come. Before Jessica could say anything more, he disappeared into the bushes off the side of the path. Not that way, Jessica called out after him. You're going to break your neck running willy-nilly through the underbrush like that. From somewhere deeper in the foliage, Brian made a surprised grunting sound, then went silent. Jessica froze. Although she had no idea why, her every instinct suddenly told her she needed to be in fight or flight mode. Brian? There was still no sound. Not him complaining, not him blundering through the underbrush, not even him crying out as he stubbed his toe on something. Go, she thought to herself. Get back down the trail as fast as possible. It was a stupid thought, she realized. That was what she would have screamed at someone to do if they were in a horror movie. But this was real life, and in real life, something didn't just come out of the woods to kill someone. In real life, someone as incompatible with nature as Brian was much more likely to stumble off a ledge and down the steep side of the mountain. And if that were the case, then if she ran, he would be as good as dead by the time she got back with help. Brian, if you're playing a joke, it's not funny, Jessica said. It can be dangerous out here if you goof around. She thought she finally heard something from the direction he had disappeared in. It sounded like something running away through the brush. Something very large. Oh crap, it really is a bear, she thought. Or maybe a mountain lion. Whatever it was, it seemed to be moving away from her at a very fast pace. Again, she fought the urge to run, reasoning that running would only make her look like prey to something like that, and whatever it was must not be in the immediate vicinity anymore anyway, and she couldn't leave Brian behind, especially if he might be hurt. She might be fully prepared to dump him as soon as they got back to town, but that sure as hell didn't mean she wanted him harmed in any way. Brian, if you can hear me, call out to me. Cautiously, she followed the path he had taken into the underbrush, moving slowly and watching her footing carefully just in case there was indeed some kind of drop-off he hadn't seen. She didn't get far, though, before her foot squelched in something damp and squishy. What the fuck? She whispered, raising her boot to see what she had stepped in. It came up dripping red. Oh shit, Brian? Brian, can you hear? She stumbled a couple of steps forward into a patch where the brush was more cleared away. That was finally where she saw the source of the blood. The two arms that laid there with blood sprayed all around them had clearly belonged to Brian. She recognized the small tattoo on his left forearm. That was all there was here, though, to show that Brian, or at least part of him, had been here. Both arms looked like they had been ripped off his body, right at the shoulder joints. And the gore, bone, and muscle hanging from them implied that whatever had removed them, it hadn't been done with any kind of sharp blade. In fact, they looked more like they had been ripped straight off of his body. Okay, she thought to herself with a sort of calm that can only come with sudden, inexplicable trauma. Now I can run. Jessica turned and did exactly that. A few seconds later, Something else in the forest, just as she feared, started to give chase.
The Vampire of Sacramento. The true story of Richard Chase, the bloodthirsty cannibal. Introduction. Humans are fascinated by evil. Pop culture is full of madmen, killers, and monsters who have become iconic characters and sometimes are even more beloved than the heroes. Villains make a story interesting, and no matter how depraved they may be, there is always a part of us that almost wants to see them win. After all, the higher the stakes, the more powerful the story. When we get older, however, we learn that true evil really does exist. A real-life villain does not need to be a criminal mastermind or a mad scientist. Merely a human being hiding in plain sight. Human monsters can turn our world upside down. Suddenly, the neighborhoods we have called home all our lives become dangerous, and the people we call our friends become suspects. When a killer strikes, can the people around the victims ever feel safe again? Richard Chase changed the lives of multiple people in the most nightmarish ways imaginable. It was not enough for him to simply take the lives of his victims. He also drank their blood and violated their bodies for his own twisted curiosity. He killed without remorse, and scariest of all, he killed without rhyme or reason. Anyone was fair game to the Vampire of Sacramento. But at the end of the day, Richard Chase was still only human, and his story is not only one of horror and disgust, but also a tragedy about an extremely sick person who was failed by his family and mental health professionals alike. Had someone taken Chase's alarming behavior seriously when he was young, would 6 innocent people still be alive? Was Chase destined to become a killer, or did life mold him into one? This book will explore not only the terrible crimes perpetrated by one of the world's most horrific and depraved murderers, but also examine the social conditions that allowed him to become a monster.
The Chronosaurus was latched to the chopper's skids, and as it fell toward the water, it was taking them with it. If it dragged them back through the tier, they were dead. "I can't break free!" The engine whined as Rory struggled to get control of R-22. "It has us! We're going to hit the water!" Jesse said. The best they could hope for was staying on the right side of time. The front of the R-22 slammed into the saltwater lake. The windscreen split. Jesse exhaled. He was getting his money's worth out of the helicopter crash course he had done. He had never expected to use the information about water escapes, but he was glad he paid attention. Water swirled about his ankles. He took off the headset. Whatever happened, they had to get out. They were going to have to swim. The lake wasn't that big, but it was full of ichthyosaurs, and he wasn't a fast swimmer. The chopper shuddered and crumpled around him. Mike screamed. Massive teeth poked through the metal. The Chronosaurus was going to crush it like a soft drink can, with them still inside. He grabbed Mike's arm to get him moving. "We've got to go!" Maybe the Chronosaurus wouldn't notice they weren't in the chopper anymore. The dinosaur wouldn't even know what a helicopter was. Rory unclipped his harness. Beyond Rory, all Jesse could see was the tongue and mouth of the dinosaur. "Go, I'll be right behind you." "Dive to clear the blades." He pointed forward, away from the tier, and toward the closest bank. The one they had stood on only yesterday and wondered where the water had come from. Jesse undid the harness, took a last breath of air, and dove into the cold salt water. Once in the water, he slung the rifle over his shoulder to free up his hands, and he kicked as fast as he could to clear the area for Mike and Rory to escape. The lake didn't seem that deep now that he was in it, but he wasn't about to stop and take a closer look. He kept going until his lungs hurt. Then he surfaced and looked behind. The R-22's tail was up in the air. He couldn't see the Chronosaurus. Waves, caused by the thrashing of the oversized dinosaur, slapped into his chest and face. Blood stained the water. Human? Or had the dinosaur cut its mouth on the chopper blades? Mike broke the surface a few meters away. "We need to get to shore. Ichthyosaurs in here. And they eat meat." Of course they did. "Where's Rory?" "He was behind me." Mike smoothly swam over. "Come on, we need to get out of here." Mike was right, but Jesse didn't want to leave Rory in the dino-infested lake. Mike turned to go without him. Jesse saw the fins in the water, heading toward the chopper and the blood. He needed to get clear of the bloodied water. "Rory!"
he shouted as he trod water trying to see him. But there was too much movement. Something bumped his leg, and the animal part of his brain kicked in. He swam after Mike, sure he was about to be dinner. After only a few strokes, something nudged his boot. He almost died on the spot. But when it happened again, he realized it was the bottom of the lake. He could stand, so he did, chest deep in the lake. He waited after Mike, who was splashing toward the shore. When the water only lapped at his waist, Jesse turned around to face the wreck. The ichthyosaurs were still hunting, and they were close to the chopper, and where the Kronosaurus still struggled, trapped by the too shallow water. That was almost too good to be true. "Rory!" Jesse yelled. Had he drowned, been eaten? 100 different scenarios rattled through his head. None of them good. He should have waited. Rory might be hurt or trapped. The Kronosaurus tossed its head, and the R-22 came free, arcing through the air, to land at the lake halfway between Jesse and the beast. The broken chopper lurched, then settled upside down. The underbelly skids out of the water. Rory surfaced, just in front of the chopper. The instant relief that had bloomed froze in Jesse's chest. Behind him were 3 fins as the ichthyosaurs stalked him. "Hurry up!" He didn't want Rory wasting time looking behind. Jesse unslung the rifle. Everything was wet, but he was sure it would still fire. If it didn't, he'd use it as a club. He waited a few steps forward, then stopped. It would do no good if he were attacked as well. He aimed just below the fin and fired twice, then again at another one, giving Rory a chance. A few more meters and Rory would be able to stand. How much depth did the ichthyosaurs need to swim? Was he safe? Jesse glanced down, and there was nothing swimming around his legs. I ran through an empty field, its tall, dry grass crunching under my boots. The sky was blue and without a cloud. Bees buzzed lazily above yellow wildflowers and birds chirped happily. The world mocked me with its placid beauty, with the suggestion that life was good and full of beauty. It was not. Life was cruel and ruthless, and not even innocent children were safe when it decided to sink its claws in. When the field ran out, I came to a stop at the edge of a cobblestone road. I'd been in this section a few times, though I'd never allowed Timothée to come. I occasionally took him to the center of the city to visit the market and see the sights, but he was forbidden to leave our square alone. I should have known that setting these boundaries was a mistake. Timothée hated to be told what to do or not to do. Walking down the middle of the street, I crossed in front of small homes with flower pots on their windows and cheery yellows and blues on their walls. Another lie to make you feel at ease. The city was one color and one color only: blood red. After racing through the residential streets, I moved on to the commercial section. Each square in the city was laid out in a similar fashion. Homes at the edges and business at the core. Nothing as busy and well-stocked as the businesses at the very center of the entire board, but enough to give the residents of that particular square access to daily goods. The center of each square was where most activities concentrated, and I prayed I would find Timothée there. When I got there, I ignored the massive obsidian statue of King Maximus that marked the center of the square and searched the crowd for a head of blonde hair instead. Timothée had inherited my mother's coloring, while I looked exactly like my father, tanned and dark-haired. At first, I didn't see him, but it wasn't long until a long shriek from a heavy-set woman sent my eyes directly to the rascal. He was chasing a dog, a scrawny creature riddled with mange of all things. "Get back here," Timothée said, while lunging for the dog's tail. I marched in his direction, blood boiling with rage. He had never done anything this stupid. When I got a hold of him, he would not be able to sit for a week. Timothée was so intent on chasing the dog, and I was so intent on catching him, that we didn't see the black rook as he stepped from behind one of the stalls and stood right in my little brother's path. I froze on the spot. A cry of warning stuck in my throat as Timothée ran smack into the black rook, and the dog scurried between his legs. Timothée bounced off the gigantic, black-clad figure. He fell to the ground with a thud. Shaking his head, he looked up and blinked.
His eyes opened wide and his face filled with fear when he realized exactly who was looming over him. Measuring my every step, I walked closer, though not before discarding the blood shade I carried in my pocket. The Black Rook's wide back was to me, and I couldn't see his expression to judge his temper. All I saw was his pristine black uniform and the outline of his precise haircut. On the other hand, Timotei's little face told me exactly how terrified he was. Sweat trickled down my back as I moved closer. My chest pounded and my hands tingled with the need to do something. But what? "Stay calm," a reasonable voice said inside my head. "Stay calm and see how the situation plays out." The Black Rook could do nothing but scold him. He was nothing more than a little boy, protected by the law. Still, I knew how much the laws mattered to the Black King and his board. I also knew of his twisted proclivities. As I closed in, I entered Timotei's field of vision. His light gray eyes darted from the Rook to me, then opened wider. He opened his mouth to say something, but I put a finger to my lips. Moving my hands up and down, I gestured for him to stay calm. He didn't need to do or say anything stupid. "Causing trouble, I see," the Rook said in a deep, rumbling voice. I'm sorry," Timotei said, lowering his head to appear contrite. "Good boy." I nodded in approval as his eyes darted back to me again. The people around us had retreated slowly, almost unnoticed, but they were still there, watching from a distance, too morbidly curious to leave and protect their hides. With a grunt, the Black Rook leaned down and grabbed Timotei by the arm. Terrified of having the creature too close to my little brother, I decided it was time to intervene. "There you are," I said as I tried to grab Timotei by his other arm to pull him away. Except the Rook's hold was too strong, and Timotei ended up trapped between two tugging forces, stretched like ragdoll between two quarreling children. "I will tan your hide, Timotei," I said, giving the Rook a sheepish smile. "Forgive him," I said. "He can be naughty sometimes, but I keep him in line." At the sight of the creature's face, I flinched. I remembered it all too well from what that fateful evening when he and his mate took my father. I shouldn't have been surprised. The Black King's board hadn't changed in years. The same bishops, knights, and rooks had occupied those positions for decades, so I'd known the monsters who had ripped father from his family hadn't gone anywhere. This Rook still had the same crazed, bloodshot eyes, the same flat nose, wide jaw, and tall forehead, the same pale skin, the same incongruously stately uniform of his brutish form, the same expression of hunger hanging from his features like a promise of death. Yet it took all I had to compose my face and force myself back into the moment at hand. My effort to appear stupid and harmless had been wasted on the Rook because his entire attention was focused on my brother. To my horror, he appeared entranced. His bloodshot eyes looked dreamy. His pale lips parted as his tongue darted out like a snake tasting the air. Nose twitching, he leaned closer into Timotei, bending from his considerable height and smelling him as if he were a big chunk of cheese. He took a long whiff, and his beastly eyes nearly rolled into the back of his head. The world around me seemed to crumble. Desperately, I pulled harder on Timotei's arm, causing him to yelp. Snapping out of his trance, the Rook planted a hand on my chest and pushed me away. I staggered backward, my arms flapping for balance. At the same time, the Rook yanked my brother closer, twisting him to face me, wrapping a hand around his little neck. "You've broken the law," the Rook said in a loud, clear voice everyone could hear. His words were slow and punctuated, as if speech were hard for his oafish brain. There were few laws that mattered to the members of the board, and one they enforced every single time. It was a commandment to them, and a source of fear for the likes of me. And when the law was broken, the culprits were sure to pay. "Thou shalt not hide a trove." The Rook smiled crookedly, then announced, "The boy is a trove. He belongs to the king." "Please don't," I begged in a low murmur. "He's just a child." The Rook threw his head back and laughed. "They all bleed," he said, "child or not." My fists shook at my sides. "I won't let you take him." Another cruel laugh escaped the Rook's mouth. "And what will you do to stop me?" he asked, just as he pushed Timotei aside and sent him flying through the air. I watched him land, hit the stall of fruit vendor, then collapse to the ground unconscious. "Timotei!" I rushed toward him, then froze. The Rook was lumbering in my direction, and there was murder in his eyes.
Without warning, and with the swiftness of lightning, the hammer fell downward. She never saw it coming. She couldn't even imagine the end she had planned for me wasn't the end I had in mind. As I reached my climax, the wedge of the hammer reached its new home as well. With her eyes focused on mine and her movement now stopped, I could see signs of wetness dripping down her forehead in the red glow of my taillights. The wetness at first looked as if it was sweat, but you and I know what it really was. She fell limp at my feet, and I moved to the side with the white glow of the tag light. I could now see the full impact of the hammer. Be sure to watch out for the upcoming iterations of the thrilling 10-part series.